I disappeared after finding out my wife's baby wasn't mine. She forged my signature, stole everything I built, and told my daughter I had a breakdown. 5 years later, my daughter found a receipt in my old jacket. That receipt unraveled 31 years of lies in a single morning. My name is Henry Grimm. I'm 57 years old, and for the last 5 years I've been living alone on a small patch of land in the hill country of eastern Tennessee, about 40 minutes from the nearest town worth naming. I grow enough to keep myself busy, run a modest grain supply operation out of the barn, and I don't bother anyone. That's the life I chose when I left Kansas behind. When I left everything behind. What I didn't choose was what Lorraine did after I left. She filed fraud papers, forged my signature on the property deed, drained my retirement account, and filed a police report claiming I was mentally unstable. She built a legal wall around everything I'd worked for and called it protecting the family. Then she hired a lawyer and waited 5 years for me to surface. 5 years. And I almost made it. I was loading grain sacks into the flatbed that Tuesday morning when I heard tires on the gravel road. Wrong sound for that hour. Too deliberate. Too smooth. City car. I straightened up and watched a silver rental sedan ease its way up the hill toward my property like it owned the road and everything past it. My old border collie, Russ, trotted to the fence line and watched without barking. Even he sensed something was off. Two people got out. Lorraine first. She looked exactly like I remembered. Same posture, same careful hair, same way of standing like she was waiting for someone to take her picture. But her eyes were different, harder, like something warm in them had been replaced with something calculated. The man who climbed out after her wore a gray suit and carried a briefcase flat against his side like a tool, not an accessory. Mid-40s, polished. The kind of lawyer who gets paid to make reasonable things sound unreasonable. I set the grain bag down slowly and walked to the fence. "Hello, Henry," Lorraine said. "Sweet as a church potluck dessert and twice as dangerous. We need to talk about what you owe us." The lawyer didn't waste time on pleasantries. His name was Philip Dowd, and he had that smooth city man way of speaking, every word arranged like furniture in a showroom. He told me that my client had been more than patient. That 5 years of absence constituted legal abandonment. That child support alone, calculated from the month I left, totaled $62,000. That there were additional claims regarding marital assets I had, quote, concealed prior to my disappearance. I looked at Lorraine while he talked. She had seated herself on my porch step without asking, ankles crossed, hands folded in her lap. The scent of her perfume drifted across the yard, something floral and expensive that didn't belong out here. "The child isn't mine," I said, keeping my voice level. "You know that, Lorraine. The test proved it before I ever left." She didn't flinch. "You were his father in every way that matters, Henry. You don't get to walk away from responsibility just because things got complicated." Dowd cleared his throat and pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Mr. Grimm, Mrs. Grimm filed a missing person report the week you disappeared. There's documented concern regarding your mental state at the time. Given those circumstances, her actions to secure family assets were entirely lawful." "What actions?" I asked. "The farm property in Kansas was transferred solely to Mrs. Grimm via quitclaim deed. Your retirement account was liquidated for immediate family needs, all properly notarized and recorded with the county. I hadn't signed anything. I knew that like I knew my own handwriting. But I also knew that a man standing in a field in Tennessee with no lawyer and no documentation is just a man with a story no one has to believe. You have 48 hours to respond," Dowd said, setting his card on the fence post. "After that, we proceed with formal legal action. Public record. Everything on file." Lorraine stood, smoothed her skirt, and looked at me with something almost like pity, the practiced kind. "Jenna said something last month that I thought you should hear. She said at least she knows what a real man isn't supposed to look like. That's your legacy, Henry." They walked back to the rental car. Tires crunched on my gravel. The engine purred to life, and they rolled back down the hill like a storm moving on to the next county. I stood there after they were gone, hand resting on the fence post, Russ sitting quiet at my boots. Across the field, my neighbor Earl Tatum was visible on his own porch, coffee mug in hand. 72 years old, Vietnam veteran, lived on that ridge longer than I'd been alive. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just stood there, watching, bearing witness. I picked up the lawyer's car from the fence post, turned it over once, and slipped it into my shirt pocket. 48 hours. I had a lot of ground to cover, and not much time to cover it. I drove 2 hours east to find a legal aid office. Didn't want anyone local involved. Not yet. The office was on the second floor of a strip mall in Cookville, sandwiched between a tax preparer and a nail salon. Fluorescent lights, stacked folders, the smell of old coffee baked into the carpet. The kind of place people end up when they can't afford the other kind. Nadine Fowler looked up from behind her desk the moment I walked in. 38, sharp eyes behind wireframe glasses, hair pulled back tight. She had that particular quality of someone who'd heard every variation of bad news and stopped being surprised by any of it. I sat down and told her everything. Coming home early from the grain co-op one afternoon to find Lorraine at the kitchen table, her expression telling me before her words did. The baby that followed 7 months later, a boy with Stuart Aldridge's jaw and Stuart Aldridge's eyes. Stuart, who managed the branch where Lorraine worked, who had attended our daughter Jenna's high school graduation and shook my hand in the parking lot afterward. The paternity test I'd requested and paid for. The results that confirmed what I already knew. Lorraine's refusal to end it. My decision to leave before the lying finished swallowing me whole. Nadine listened without interrupting. When I finished, she clicked her pen twice and asked the question I'd been dreading. Do you have documentation? The test results, financial records, anything from before you left? No, I said. I want a clean break. Took my truck, my tools, my dog. That's all. She wrote something on her legal pad. Without documentation, this becomes your word against hers. And Mr. Grimm, the fact that you left without any legal process doesn't help you. Abandonment is abandonment in a judge's eyes, regardless of the reason behind it. She forged my signature, I said. On the deed, on whatever she filed. I never signed anything. Then we need proof of that. Nadine set her pen down. Do you have a former business partner? Anyone who might have kept financial record from your time in Kansas? Asset statements, partnership documents, anything with your actual signature that we can compare to what she filed. Clifford Base. The name surfaced immediately. Cliff and I had run the grain distribution side by side for 11 years before I sold him my half and walked away. Cliff was the kind of man who kept every receipt in a shoebox and called it a filing system, but nothing ever got thrown out. Tax reasons, he always said. I have someone, I told Nadine. My old partner. If anyone kept the paperwork, it's him. Call him today, she said. And Mr. Grimm, one more thing. She looked at me directly. There's a legal concept called presumptive paternity. In certain circumstances, a man who functioned as a child's father, regardless of biology, can be held financially responsible. Her lawyer will try to use it. We need to be prepared for that argument. The words settled over me like a cold front moving in. I'd left to escape a lie. Now the law might make the lie permanent. I thanked Nadine, walked back down to the parking lot, and sat in my truck with the engine off. Cliff's number was still on my phone. I kept it without quite knowing why. Maybe because some part of me always knew this day was coming. 3 rings. Then his voice, surprised and cautious all at once. Henry, that really you? Yeah, Cliff. It's me. I watched a woman load groceries into a minivan across the lot. Normal Tuesday. Normal life. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always, he said. You know that. Did you keep the partnership records? The dissolution files, asset statements, everything from when you bought me out? A pause, long enough to feel. Henry, Cliff said slowly, I kept everything. Tax reasons. But you need to tell me what's going on, because a woman called my office 2 days ago asking questions about you. My hand tightened on the phone. 2 days ago, I said. What did she want to know? Your whereabouts. Your assets. Whether I'd had contact with you. Another pause. Henry, what did Lorraine do? Cliff called back the next evening. I was on the porch watching the last light drain out of the sky over the ridge. Rust stretched across my boots like a warm anchor. Earl Tatum's porch light was already on across the field, steady as a lighthouse. I found everything, Cliff said. His voice had that particular weight men carry when they know the news is going to land hard. Henry, she didn't just take the house. I set my coffee mug on the rail. Tell me, the quitclaim deed on the Kansas property, your signature on that document looks nothing like what I got here on our dissolution papers. The G is wrong. The whole slant is off. Somebody practiced, but not enough. He exhaled slowly. Your retirement account was liquidated 11 days after you left. The transfer went to a private account. I cross-referenced the routing number as best I could. It traces back to a bank where Stuart Aldridge is listed as a senior account holder. Stuart, Lorraine's boss. The man who'd shaken my hand at Jenna's graduation. There's more, Cliff continued. I talked to your old neighbor Linda Kozer last week. She said she remembered a man coming around the house regularly about 12, 13 years ago, when you were doing the long-haul grain runs. She thought it was a contractor at first. Described him. Henry, it wasn't Stewart. The porch felt smaller suddenly. She was at it longer than I thought. A lot longer. Cliff's voice went tight. Stewart wasn't the first. He was just the one who stuck. I didn't say anything for a moment. 31 years. And I'd spent the last 5 thinking I understood the scope of what had happened. Turns out I'd only seen the most recent chapter. I'll testify, Cliff said. Whatever you need. Hold on that for now, I told him. There may be pressure coming your way. Don't commit to anything until I've talked to my lawyer. A pause. Already had some. A woman called my office 2 days ago, Henry. Polished voice. Asked questions about our partnership terms, our asset valuations. Then yesterday a man called. Said he was doing a routine inquiry. Asked whether I had any documentation from our dissolution. Cliff's tone sharpened. I told him I need to see credentials before I discussed anything. He hung up. Dowd, or someone working for Dowd. They were trying to find out what Cliff had before Cliff could hand it to me. Don't talk to anyone else, I said. Scan everything and send it to this number. Every page. Already scanning, he said. And Henry, I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions back then. When Lorraine told people you'd had a breakdown, I didn't push back the way I should have. You didn't know, I said. Neither did I fully. We hung up. I looked out at Earl's porch light and thought about 12 years of a lie I hadn't even known to look for. 2 mornings after Cliff's call, I found myself sitting in my truck with the engine running, a bag on the passenger seat, and maps of Western Virginia pulled up on my phone. It wasn't a decision I'd consciously made. It was instinct, the same deep pull that had moved me out of Kansas 5 years ago. When the ground shifts, find higher ground. Russ was in the truck bed, watching me through the rear window with those patient brown eyes. I sat there for 3 minutes, maybe 4. Earl's old Ford pickup rolled down his drive and turned into mine, blocking the lane. He got out unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world and intended to use it deliberately. He was carrying something, a flat metal box, the kind you'd lock deeds and insurance papers in, scratched and dented with years of honest use. He came around to my window and knocked once. I rolled it down. Going somewhere, he asked. Thinking about it. Thinking's fine, Earl said. Leaving's a different thing. He set the metal box on my hood with a solid clank. Before you do either one, I need you to look at what's in here. I turned the engine off. We went to the porch. Earl unlocked the box and began laying folders out across the table one at a time, organized, tabbed, color-coded with a precision that didn't match the worn exterior. He'd been building this thing quietly for 5 years. First folder, he said, opening it flat. Property and deed records. Copies from a county clerk in Kansas showing the transfer date, the notary stamp, the recorded signature. I submitted a records request 14 months ago. I stare at the documents. Official. Stamped. Real. Second folder. Financial trail. He slid across. Bank records, transaction dates, transfer amounts. My retirement account emptied in a single move. Destination account. Stuart Aldridge's name connected to it by 2 degrees of paperwork. I hired a researcher for 6 weeks. Cost me most of what I'd set aside for a new roof. Earl, let me finish. He opened the third folder. Missing person report and police interview notes. Lorraine filed it 2 hours and 18 minutes after you drove away. 2 hours, Henry. She had that story ready before your taillights were off the road. He pointed to a highlighted line. Interview with Clifford Bass, your former partner. He confirmed you seemed depressed in the months before you left. She used his words to build the mental instability narrative. He didn't know what he was doing. The fourth folder held something I recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. A single typed page with my signature at the bottom, notarized, dated the day I left. A UPS store stamp in the corner. You wrote that the morning you drove out, Earl said quietly. The notary clerk in Salina kept it when you didn't come back to retrieve it. Took me 4 months to track her down. Woman named Irene Baranova, 69 years old. Kept in a file because she said something about you told her it mattered. Said you came in with steady hands and sad eyes and wrote every word like it was going to be read in court someday. I read my own words. Every one of them true. Every one of them documented. I was ready to run again, I admitted. I know, Earl said. He didn't say it with judgment. But a man doesn't have to run when he's got ground to stand on. You got ground now, Henry. 6 inches of it. right there on that table. Russ had climbed the porch steps and settled beside my chair without being asked. I picked up my phone and called Nadine Fowler. I have documentation, I said when she answered. All of it. A beat of silence. How much? Enough, I said. Can you meet tomorrow? Jenna had been engaged to Reed for 8 months, and somewhere in that time, she'd developed the habit of going through her mother's house looking for things that might be useful for the wedding. Old photos, decorations from holidays past, fabric her grandmother had stored in boxes decades ago. Lorraine encouraged it, said it was a good way to honor family history. That particular Saturday in early November, Jenna was in the spare room off the garage, working through stacked boxes while Reed sat in the kitchen pretending to read the newspaper. She'd already found 3 boxes of Christmas ornaments and a lace tablecloth that might work for the reception when she pulled down a box labeled Simply Henry. Misk. She almost pushed it aside. Then she opened it. Inside were things she recognized from childhood. A pair of work gloves. A battered almanac from 2003. A canvas barn jacket, brown and worn at the elbows, smelling faintly of grain dust and machine oil. The jacket her father had worn every fall morning for years. The one she used to grab off the hook by the back door when she was cold and he wasn't home yet. She lifted it out and held it for a moment. Just held it. What did you find? Reed called from the kitchen. Old stuff, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. She was folding the jacket to set it aside when she felt something stiff in the inner breast pocket. A piece of paper, folded small, yellow to the folds. She opened it carefully. Nebraska Medical Laboratory. Patient name, Henry Grimm. Test type, prenatal paternity analysis. Date of service, March 14th. Results, available for pickup. The date. She read it 3 times. March of the year her father left. 4 months before her half-brother was born. 6 weeks before her father's truck disappeared from the driveway, and her mother sat her down and explained, with practiced sorrow, that her father had suffered some kind of breakdown and walked away from the family. Jenna sat down on the floor of that spare room with the receipt in her hands and felt the architecture of the last 5 years shift under her like settling ground. Her father had known. Before he left, he had ordered a paternity test on the baby her mother was carrying, which meant her mother had known he knew, which meant the story Jenna had been given, the breakdown, the abandonment, the man who simply couldn't handle responsibility, had been built on top of something her mother had never once mentioned. She found Reed in the kitchen doorway, handed him the receipt without a word. He read it slowly. Then he looked up. Jenna, don't say it yet, she said. Just don't say anything yet. She went back to the spare room and sat on the floor again. That was when she found her old phone in the same box, the one she'd used through college, stored away when she upgraded. She'd been meaning to clear it out for years. She plugged it into the charger on the spare room shelf out of habit, and 20 minutes later, when enough charge had built up, it flickered to life. Old texts, old photos, and a video from Christmas 5 years ago. Thumbnail showing the living room full of wrapping paper and her father laughing at something off camera. She pressed play. Her father's voice filled the small room. He was telling some story about a grain delivery gone wrong in a snowstorm, doing the voices, making Jenna, her younger self, visible at the edge of the frame, laugh so hard she had to hold onto the couch. The kind of laugh that belongs to people who are completely comfortable with each other. She'd forgotten that laugh, forgotten she'd ever had her around him. She watched it twice. The second time, she didn't make it to the end. Reed appeared in the doorway again, quiet. He sat down on the floor beside her without being asked. I told people he abandoned us, Jenna said. Her voice was unsteady. For 5 years I told anyone who asked that my father walked out on his family because he couldn't handle real life. You believed what you were told, Reed said. I was 23 years old. I should have asked more questions. She looked at the receipt still in her hand. He knew about the baby, Reed. He took a test. He had proof. And then he left, but not because he had a breakdown. Because my mother was pregnant with another man's child and wouldn't stop seeing him. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, you need to call him. Jenna pulled up her contacts. Her father's old number was still there, unchanged, sitting in her phone like something she'd never been willing to fully let go of. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she typed, Dad, I found something in your old jacket. A receipt from a medical lab, dated before you left. I think we need to talk. She set the phone down and waited. The reply came 11 minutes later. That test proved the child your mother was carrying wasn't mine. She knew the results before I drove away. I'm sorry you're finding out like this, Jenna. I always thought you deserved the truth. Jenna read it twice. Then she stood up, walked to the kitchen, and called her mother. "Mom," she said, keeping her voice level with effort. "I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be honest. Was the baby Dad's?" Lorraine's pause lasted 2 full seconds too long. "That's a complicated question, sweetheart. It's a yes or no question," Jenna said. "And the fact that you're not answering it is answering it." She hung up, looked at Reed. "I'm going to Tennessee." Reed was already reaching for his jacket. "I'll drive." They left at 6 the next morning. Reed drove the first stretch, and Jenna sat in the passenger seat watching Ohio flatten out behind them, and the landscape slowly change character as they crossed into Kentucky. Neither of them said much for the first 2 hours. There wasn't much to say that the silence wasn't already saying. It was somewhere around Lexington that Jenna started talking. "When Dad left, I was in my second year at KSU," she said. "Mom called me on a Tuesday afternoon, told me he'd had a breakdown, that he'd been acting erratic for months, that he'd just driven away one night without a word." She was crying. Jenna looked out the window. I believed her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. "Of course you believed her," Reed said. "But I'm 28 years old now. I've been an adult for a long time. At some point I stopped being a kid who got deceived and became an adult who just didn't ask questions." She turned the receipt over in her hands. She'd been holding it since they left. "That's on me." Reed kept his eyes on the road. "Or it's on a woman who spent 5 years making sure you had no reason to question the story." Jenna didn't answer right away. That was the argument she'd been turning over since last night. The line between being manipulated and being willfully incurious. She wasn't sure the line existed. Maybe both things could be true at once. "Mom got us involved in a church group about a year after Dad left," she said after a while. "Reverend Dale Whitmore's congregation in Salina. Nice people, very supportive. I remember them being kind to us." She paused. "Reed, last spring I saw something in Mom's files when I was helping her organize paperwork for her loan refinancing. A letter from Reverend Whitmore. It was addressed to a county court. Character testimony, it said." Reed glanced at her. "For what?" "I didn't read the whole thing. I thought it was routine. Now I'm thinking it wasn't." Jenna folded the receipt and slipped it into her coat pocket. "She used the church, Reed. She went to a pastor with her version of things, and he wrote to a court on her behalf, and none of those people ever heard my father's name said by anyone except her. That's a real thing people do," Reed said quietly. He'd spent 6 years as a JAG officer before leaving the service. He'd seen family law cases go sideways in every direction imaginable. It's manipulative, and it works. A pastor's character letter carries weight with certain judges. "She built the whole story," Jenna said. "Brick by brick. The breakdown narrative, the church community, the missing person report." She stopped. "There was a missing person report. I remember signing something. A witness statement," Mom said, just confirming I hadn't heard from him. "I was 23, and I signed it without reading it carefully." She went quiet. "What did I sign, Reed?" "We don't know yet," he said. "Let's not get ahead of the evidence." They crossed into Tennessee just after noon. The landscape shifted again, hills rolling up on both sides of the highway, the kind of country that felt like it was keeping its own counsel. Jenna had a text from her mother asking where she was. She didn't answer it. "What if he's not who I hope he is?" she said. The question had been sitting at the back of her throat for hours. "Then you'll know the truth from his own mouth instead of someone else's," Reed said. "That's worth the drive either way." Jenna looked at her father's address on her phone, a rural route number east of a town she'd never heard of. She thought about the video on her old phone. His laugh. The way he made her laugh without even trying. He kept the same number for 5 years, she said. Didn't change it. Didn't go completely dark. She looked out at the hills. A man who wanted to be truly gone would have changed the number. Reed didn't say anything. He just drove. They arrived at the gravel road leading up to Henry's property just before 3 in the afternoon. The hills were golden brown in the November light, the air sharp and clean through the cracked window. At the top of the rise, a modest farmhouse, a barn, a fence line, a border collie sitting at attention near the gate like he'd been expecting them. Jenna got out of the car. The dog watched her without moving. Then the front door opened, and her father stepped onto the porch. He looked older, steadier, somehow, than she remembered. The kind of steady that comes not from ease, but from having worked through something hard all the way to the other side. She walked to the porch steps and stopped. "I found a receipt in your old jacket," she said, "and I have a lot of questions." Her father nodded slowly. "Come up," he said. "I've got coffee on, and I'll tell you everything." Jenna sat in the porch chair closest to the steps, like she needed to know the exit was there. Reed had taken the chair against the wall, quiet and observant, giving us the space to do what needed doing. Russ settled between us on the floorboards, which I took as a good sign. He'd always been a decent judge of people. I poured coffee without asking. My hands were steady. I'd spent 5 years living alone in the hills, and whatever the next hour was going to cost me, I wasn't going to face it with shaking hands. Start from the beginning, Jenna said. Not Mom's beginning. Yours. So I did. I told her about the long-haul grain runs into Missouri and Oklahoma, the weeks away from home, the way Lorraine's manner had shifted when I came back. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, like a house settling on its foundation, small adjustments that added up over time. I told her I'd suspected something for the better part of 2 years before I knew for certain. The day I found out wasn't dramatic, I said. I came home from the co-op early because a delivery fell through. Lorraine was on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't hear me come in. I heard enough. I wrapped both hands around my mug. I didn't confront her that day. I needed to be sure. So I arranged the test. The receipt I found, Jenna said. The results came back on a Thursday morning. I went to the lab, picked them up myself, sat in my truck in the parking lot, and read them. I looked at her directly. Not my child, Jenna. I already knew it, but seeing it on paper makes it real in a different way. Jenna was quiet. Her jaw was set. I came home that evening, and I told your mother what I knew. She didn't deny it. She cried. Real tears. I'll give her that. And she told me she'd been lonely, that I was away too much, that Stuart had been there when I wasn't. I kept my voice level. I asked her if she was willing to end it and work on our marriage. She said she needed time to think about it. I paused. 3 days later, she told me she wasn't ready to cut off the relationship, that she had feelings for him that she needed to process, that she hoped I would understand and give her space to figure things out. She wanted you to stay while she kept seeing him, Jenna said. Not a question. She wanted me to raise his child, pretend nothing had happened, and wait while she decided whether our marriage was worth saving. I set the mug down. I couldn't do it. I packed my truck and drove east. Jenna was quiet for a long moment. The morning light had shifted, cutting a long line across the porch boards. She told me you had a breakdown, she said finally, that you'd been erratic for months, that she tried to get you help and you'd refused. That one night you just left. She looked up. I signed a witness statement, Dad. She said it was a routine form. I didn't read it carefully. Earl Tatum's folder had included a copy of that statement. Jenna's signature at the bottom, dated 3 days after I left. She confirmed that I had seemed withdrawn and unpredictable in the months prior. She hadn't known what she was signing. Lorraine had known exactly what she was doing. You were 23 years old, I said. You believe your mother. That's not a failure on your part. I'm 28 now, Jenna said, and there was an edge in it directed at herself, not at me. I had 5 years to ask questions, and I didn't ask them. Reed spoke from his chair for the first time. Someone spent 5 years making sure you had no reason to ask. His voice was measured. The voice of a man trained to see how evidence shapes a narrative. The missing person report, the witness statements, the church community. That's a constructed environment, Jenna. It doesn't survive the first honest question, which is exactly why no one in that environment was ever going to ask one. She looked at him, looked at me. The church, she said. Reverend Whitmore wrote to a court. I know, I said. Earl has a copy. The Reverend believed what your mother told him. He's not a villain. He was deceived like everyone else. I leaned forward. Jenna, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to hate your mother. Whatever she did to me, she's still your mother, and you have a right to that relationship. What I'm asking you to believe is that I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because staying meant dying slowly inside a house built on a lie I hadn't agreed to live in. Jenna set her mug down on the porch rail and stood up. She walked to the end of the porch and stood there looking out over the fields for a good minute, arms crossed, the cold November wind moving her hair. Then she turned around. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Clifford Bass, she said. He has documents. He does. Signatures, financial records, everything. And Earl. She looked toward the neighboring property. He put this together himself. Over 5 years. Every folder, I said. He did it without being asked. Something moved across her face that I didn't have a name for. She walked back to her chair and sat down. There's a document in Earl's file, I said carefully. A letter I wrote the day I left. I don't remember writing it. I was operating on pure adrenaline. But I stopped at a UPS store in Salina, and wrote everything down and had it notarized. A woman named Irene Baranova kept it when I didn't come back to retrieve it. She remembered me, said I had steady hands and sad eyes. Jenna looked at me for a long time. "Can I read it?" she asked. I went inside and brought out the folder. She took the letter and read it standing up, the way people read things they're afraid might undo them if they sit down for it. I watched her face move through things I couldn't name and didn't try to. When she finished, she folded it carefully and handed it back. "Read," she said, without looking away from me. "You need to look at all of this. As a lawyer, not as my fiancé." Reed was already leaning forward. "I've been looking at it since I walked onto this porch." Jenna reached out then and put her hand briefly on mine. "Just for a second. Just long enough to mean something. Tell me what happens next," she said. Nadine Fowler arrived at the farm just after sundown, her compact car loaded with organized folders and the business-like energy of someone who had reviewed documents until midnight and come out the other side with a clear plan. She spread materials across my kitchen table, and for the next 2 hours the four of us, Nadine, Earl, Reed, and me, worked through the architecture of what we were going to present the following morning. Lorraine had confirmed by text, relayed through Dowd, that she would arrive at 10 with her attorney to conduct what Dowd had called a final resolution discussion. Neutral language for what both sides understood to be a confrontation. Ruth Forsyth joined by phone at 8 o'clock. Ruth was 64, a former document examiner with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, 31 years in the field before retirement. Earl had found her through a forensic records network 4 months ago. Her voice on the phone was precise and unhurried. "The signatures are definitively different," she said, without preamble. "The quitclaim deed and the account authorization both show consistent deviations from the exemplars in the partnership dissolution documents. Letter formation in the G, baseline angle, pin pressure distribution. I'll have a written opinion filed with the court by end of week. In my professional opinion, these documents were not signed by Henry Grimm." "Thank you, Ruth," Nadine said. She made a note. Reed had set his legal pad next to Nadine's folders. He'd identified 3 additional avenues of attack in the financial documentation. Transfer sequencing that suggested premeditation rather than emergency response, and a banking procedure irregularity that pointed to someone with internal knowledge of account access protocols. Lorraine managed a branch, he said to Nadine. She would have known the exact process for accessing accounts under a mental health emergency declaration. She didn't just exploit the system. She engineered the situation to fit the system. "That's the piece that turns this from civil fraud into something closer to criminal conduct," Nadine said. "We don't file criminal charges. That's for the DA. But we make the argument clearly enough that her attorney understands what exposure she's looking at." Earl sat at the end of the table drinking coffee and not saying much. He'd done his part. The rest of this was other people's work, and he understood that. At 9, Jenna stepped out onto the porch and called her mother. I could hear the tone of the conversation through the window, but not the words. It lasted 4 minutes. When she came back in, she was composed in the way people are when they've made a decision they can't walk back from. "She's coming," Jenna said. "She's bringing Dowd. She doesn't know I'm here." 20 miles away, in a motel room in Greenville, Lorraine and Philip Dowd were having a very different kind of meeting. I didn't know the specifics then. I learned them later. But Dowd had learned that afternoon about Ruth Forsyth's involvement through his own legal network, and he'd had a sharp conversation with Lorraine about what had and hadn't been disclosed to him about the provenance of the documents he'd been filing. What I didn't know, because Chet Grover called me at 9:30 that evening, was that Dowd had already reached out to the county court to request a procedural delay. "He's going to try to stall," Chet said. His voice had the flat calm of a man who'd seen legal maneuvering before and wasn't impressed by it. "I also want you to know, I drove by that motel this evening. Not officially, just driving. And I happened to notice that Philip Dowd doesn't look like a man who thinks he has a winning hand." "What does he look like?" I asked. "Like a man calculating how quickly he can get his name off something," Chet said. He paused. "Henry, you're going to be fine tomorrow. You've got the ground. You've got the documents. You've got people in your corner." Another pause, and "I'll be in the area, in case the situation requires a badge." He hung up before I could thank him properly. After everyone left, I sat alone on the porch for an hour. Russ at my feet, the Tennessee hills dark against a sky thick with stars. The night was cold and still and honest in the way that only certain nights are, when the air has no agenda and the darkness doesn't feel like a threat. I thought about the last time I'd felt completely trapped, sitting in a parking lot in Salina with a paternity test in my lap, understanding with total clarity that the life I'd built had been constructed on ground that wasn't solid. That morning I'd walked into a UPS store, written down everything I knew and felt and chose, had it notarized, and left without the copy because some part of me had already moved past the need to hold on to it. I'd spent 5 years thinking that document didn't exist anymore, that the record of who I was and why I left had simply dissolved. Turned out a 69-year-old woman named Irene Baranova had kept it in a manila folder in her desk drawer because she said something about my eyes told her it mattered. Some things hold together even when you let go of them. I went inside at midnight, set the alarm for 6, made sure the coffee pot was ready to run. Tomorrow I was going to stand on my own porch and tell the truth out loud in front of the woman who'd spent 5 years burying it. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Lorraine's rental car came up the road at 9:58. 2 minutes early. She'd always been precise about punctuality when it served her image. Philip Dowd's sedan followed 30 seconds behind. They parked side by side in my gravel drive and got out together. Lorraine in her church meeting clothes, Dowd with his briefcase, both of them moving with the rehearsed confidence of people who believe they held the stronger position. Then Lorraine saw Jenna on the porch. She stopped walking, just for a second, barely visible, but I saw it. Dowd saw it too, because he put a hand briefly on her elbow and said something low. Lorraine composed herself and kept walking. Jenna. Her voice was warm, practiced. "What are you doing here, sweetheart?" "Standing with my father," Jenna said. She didn't move from her spot beside my chair. Something shifted in Lorraine's expression. She looked at me. I looked back and didn't say anything. Let the silence work. Nadine opened the proceedings from the porch table, where Earl's folders were arranged in clean order. "I'll present documentation systematically, Mr. Dowd. We can save everyone time." Dowd sat down in the chair Earl had placed for him. His face was carefully neutral, the professional mask of a man who'd been doing this long enough not to telegraph his reactions. But he wasn't the man who'd driven up to my farm 2 weeks ago with the loose stride of someone delivering terms. Something had tightened in him. First folder, the deed transfer. Nadine laid the 2 signatures side by side, the quitclaim with Lorraine's version of my name, and the partnership dissolution with my actual signature. Ruth Forsythe, formerly of the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, has filed a written forensic opinion confirming these were signed by 2 different people. The opinion is attached. Dowd examined the documents without speaking. His pen moved once across his notepad, then stopped. Second folder, the financial trail. Nadine walked through the timeline. Retirement account liquidated 11 days after I left. Transfer to an account connected to Stuart Aldridge. The transaction records, cross-referenced with Mr. Aldridge's publicly available account information, indicate the funds were directed to an account where Mr. Aldridge holds signatory authority. Lorraine's hands, folded in her lap, tightened. One finger moved against the other. That was all. Third folder, the missing person report and its timing. Filed 2 hours and 18 minutes after Mr. Grimm's departure, Nadine said. The report describes a mental health crisis and was used to authorize emergency account access. The procedural irregularity, specifically the absence of any independent medical assessment required under Kansas statute, will be a central point in our counterfiling. Dowd set his pen down. "Mrs. Grimm," he said quietly, without looking at Lorraine. Just her name, just the weight of it. Fourth folder, my notarized letter, dated the morning I left. Nadine read 2 lines aloud. The rest she slid toward Dowd. He read it. His jaw worked once. Then Jenna stood up. "Mom." Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something. "I need to ask you something in front of everyone here, and I need you to answer me honestly." She paused. "Did you know Dad had taken a paternity test before he left?" Lorraine looked at her daughter with an expression I recognized from 31 years of marriage. The gathering of resources, the calculation of angles, the decision about which version of the truth was most survivable. "Jenna, this is between your father and me. It stopped being just between you and him the day you had me sign a witness statement I didn't fully understand," Jenna said. "Answer the question." The silence on the porch was complete. Even the wind seemed to hold off. Lorraine looked at me. Something in her face moved. Not guilt exactly, but the recognition that the architecture she'd built was no longer bearing weight. "Yes," she said. "I knew." Dowd stood up immediately. He closed his briefcase with a precise click and looked at Nadine. "Ms. Fowler, my client and I will need to discuss the parameters of a negotiated resolution. I'd suggest we recess and reconvene within the week." "Of course," Nadine said. Lorraine stood. She looked at Jenna once more, not with anger, but with something older and harder to name. Then she looked at me. "I never thought you'd fight back," she said. "Not cruelty, just truth." "I know," I said. "That was your mistake." They walked to the cars. Dowd's engine started first. Lorraine sat in hers for nearly a minute before she started it and reversed slowly down the gravel road. After the dust settled, Chet Grover's truck rolled up the drive. He got out, looked at the empty space where 2 cars had been, and raised an eyebrow. "How'd it go?" "The way it needed to," I said. He nodded once, satisfied, and got back in his truck. Earl collected his folders. Ree made a call. Nadine was already typing on her phone, and Jenna was sitting on the porch steps with her elbows on her knees, looking out at the Tennessee hills, quiet and still. I sat down beside her. Rust settled between us. "She admitted it," Jenna said after a while. "In front of everyone. She did. I don't know what to do with that yet." "You don't have to know today," I said. She looked at me. "Are you okay?" The question landed somewhere I hadn't expected. I thought about it honestly. "Yeah," I said. "I am." The settlement came through 9 weeks later. Lorraine returned everything. The Kansas farm proceeds, the retirement account balance minus documented living expenses, and a sum Nadine had negotiated as restitution for the false police report filing. The criminal fraud referral to the DA's office was conditionally withdrawn upon full compliance. Stuart Aldridge's name appeared in the financial restitution paperwork as a co-obligor, which I was told caused a significant problem in his professional life. I didn't pursue it further. That wasn't my work to do. Reverend Whitmore wrote me a letter. 2 pages, handwritten, the kind of careful penmanship that belongs to a man who takes words seriously. He said he'd been deceived, that he was deeply sorry for the role his letter had played, and that he'd spoken with his congregation about the importance of hearing both sides before lending institutional weight to any one person's account. I wrote back, kept it brief, said I appreciated the honesty and bore him no ill will. I meant it. The bank that had authorized emergency account access without proper medical documentation agreed to a settlement outside of court. The amount was modest, but the principle mattered more than the money. Cliff Base drove down from Kansas in March. First time I'd seen him in 5 years. We spent 2 days fixing fence line and talking about nothing important, which is what old friends do when they've been through something and need to come out the other side of it without making it larger than it needs to be. Before he drove home, he shook my hand and held it a second longer than usual. "You look like yourself again," he said. Getting there, I told him. Earl turned 73 in April. Jenna organized a dinner. Nothing elaborate, just the 4 of us at my kitchen table with good food and better company. She brought a bottle of Tennessee whiskey, and Earl had produced a deck of cards from his jacket pocket. And somewhere around 10 o'clock Reed was down $11 and trying to figure out how a 73-year-old Vietnam veteran had taken him apart so methodically. Earl didn't explain his methods. He just collected his winnings. Jenna and Reed got married in June. The ceremony was outdoors, at a venue 2 hours south of Nashville, surrounded by the kind of summer green that makes you feel like the world means well. I was given a seat in the second row, which was Jenna's way of telling me something without having to say it. We weren't all the way back to where we'd been. 5 years of distance doesn't close in a season, but we were building something new on honest ground, and that was worth more than trying to recover what the years had taken. She danced once with Reed, and once with an empty spot of floor that I understood was for the version of things she'd wanted and hadn't gotten. I watched from my chair and didn't look away. When the music slowed, she walked across the floor and held out her hand. "Don't make it weird," she said. So I didn't. We danced. Not long, not dramatic. Just a father and his daughter, moving to a song I don't even remember the name of, on a June evening that smelled like cut grass and good weather. It was enough. August arrived with the kind of heat that makes the Tennessee hills shimmer. I added 2 more grain supply contracts, hired a part-time hand to help with delivery runs, and built a new storage shed on the east side of the property. Russ supervised the construction from a shady patch under the oak tree and offered no useful feedback. One evening, sitting on the porch with the fireflies coming up from the fields, Earl walked over with 2 mugs and set one in front of me without asking. We sat there in the familiar silence that had built up between us over years of proximity and the particular trust that comes from having gone through something hard together. "Never thank you properly," I said after a while. "You don't owe me thanks. Earl said, I know I don't. I'm giving it anyway. He was quiet for a moment. You'd have done the same. I looked out at the fields. The fireflies rose and fell in their patient, persistent way.